We all know there exists such thing as Chassidim. Chasidus was founded by Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. His name was Yisrael. He was called the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov means the person with a good name. And he lived in the 1700s. What was his direction? What did the Baal Shem Tov contribute to the world? So first of all, there are certain things that the Baal Shem Tov brought into the world that was not known before. It means he was mechadish. It was a new thing. But most of the things of Baal Shem Tov was that he refreshed Judaism, because Judaism in Europe kind of went off the way that it was supposed to go, and it was not going in the right direction. So the Baal Shem Tov came to refresh it, to kind of wake up of how Judaism is supposed to be practiced. So let's understand the Baal Shem Tov. So what I'm going to teach over here is not details. It's more of the overall picture, because to know the details, you gotta learn a lot Chasidus. So the first thing which the Baal Shem Tov taught was the concept of bittul. Now, I don't know if there's an exact translation from the word bittul to English. Bittul means to be complete subservient, or just subservient, or maybe nullify. It basically means when you don't think much about yourself, you completely let your guard down to the master, which is Hashem. So the Baal Shem Tov brought down that every Jew has to learn to have complete bittul to Hashem, to not think much about yourself. To explain it, there's a story which there is a song in Yiddish by Yom Tov, which he was an old Jewish singer. So basically the story goes like this. Rebbe the Mezritcher Maggid, which he took over after the Baal Shem Tov, he had a student who spent some time by him, and he went home. On the way home, he passed the city of Karlin, and over there lived the Rabban Karliner. So he figured, if I'm passing the city, let me stop in and say hello to my friend, Rabban. So he went to Rabban's house, and he saw through the window that he's sitting and learning. So he knocked on the window. Rabban picked up his head and he asked, "Who is there?" So the guy answered, "Das bin ich." That means, "This is me." So Rabban continued to learn and ignored him. So he knocked again. So Rabban picked up his head again and asked, "Who is there?" So the guy answered again, "This is me." So Rabban looked down back at the cipher and continued to learn. And this kept on repeating multiple times until finally the guy stated his name. And then Rabban went to the door and opened it up and gave him Shalom Aleichem and asked him from where you're coming and where you're going. So he told him, "I spent some time by the Maggid and now I'm heading home, and on the way home I stopped in to say hello." So Rabban asked him, "Do you feel that you learned enough by the Maggid that you could go home?" So he replied, "Yes." So the Rabban told him, "If you have by you the slightest concept that exists such a thing as me, that the I exists, then you haven't learned nothing from the Maggid. Might as well make a U-turn and return back to the Maggid." Now this story explains more or less the direction of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov taught us that we should have complete bittul for Hashem, to be complete subservient, that the concept of me shouldn't even exist. There's only one me. Me is Anochi Hashem Elokeinu. I am your God. That's the only I exists. But other than that, there's no such a thing as me or I. Now, of course, I believe a lot of people ask, in Judaism, we all know there exists such a thing as you have to be humble. Are you going to tell me all other Gedolei Yisrael weren't humble? They didn't have bittul for Hashem? So the answer is, first of all, there were some people who were considered Gedolim. They were big Talmidei Chachomim, big Oinim, but sadly, they did not really work on themselves and end up using the Torah to support their ego. Now, there were Gedolim who actually were very subservient and they had bittul, but the thing is, it was only them. It was not taught to the typical person. So This was another thing which the Baal Shem Tov brought down to the world, was that every Jew is special. So let's dive in a little into history, how European Jewry looked in those days. In those days, in order for a person to gain status, for a person to be considered something, you needed to have one of these 4 qualifications. Number 1, be a Talmud Chochem, a big learning person. Number 2, was yichus, means you were born into a big family. Let's say your father was the rabbi of the city, or your grandfather was the rabbi of the city, or any other big yichus. You came from a big family, then you had status. Number 3, money. Money talks. So if somebody had money, had status. Number 4 was if somebody was a celebrity. So a lot of celebrities become rich, but not all the time, especially those days, not all Jewish celebrities were rich. So let's say somebody was a chazan, especially in a small village. He was a famous person, but he didn't necessarily have money. So that was another way of a person gaining status. So if a person did not have any of those 4 things, were basically considered a second-class citizen, like a nothing. Now the Baal Shem Tov came and refreshed this and claimed, no, this is wrong. It says, Kol Yisrael yesh lehem chayil lo elam abu. Every Jew has a part of heaven. So the Baal Shem Tov elevated every Jew, and he claimed we need to elevate every Jew, even the person that is Amur. It's Amur means a person that doesn't know how to learn at all. We have to elevate him because every Jew is special. So the concept of bittul, what the Baal Shem Tov was teaching, was that every Jew should learn that you have to have bittul. Is first of all, if a person sits and learns all day and he never gets into the fact that he needs to have bittul, he never learns that, then such a person can end up developing a whole ego out of his learning and go in the opposite direction that he's supposed to go. So for the Talmud Chochem, it's also important to learn this factor, and especially for the typical person. For the typical person before that was never taught this concept that you need to learn to be complete subservient. And this is what the Baal Shem Tov came and brought into the world, that every person should learn that they have to be subservient to Hashem, to have complete bittul. Now, how do you become subservient to Hashem? How do you get to have bittul by you, to not think much about yourself? So that the Baal Shem Tov brought into the world, which part of it he kind of more encouraged, and the other part he actually brought in a new thing, which is Kabbalah and Chasidus. Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism. Mysticism explains the depth of things. Things are not the way it seems to us. So before the Baal Shem Tov, Kabbalah was not a thing that a typical person learned, and it's mentioned in Halacha that a person should not learn Kabbalah before age of 40, only if he knows all Shas and Poskim, like if he's a big Talmud Chochem. So Ashkenazi Jews had a big thing not to learn Kabbalah, so there were a lot of Talmidei Chachomim who did not learn Kabbalah, even though they passed the age of 40 and they knew all Shas and Poskim. So the Baal Shem Tov encouraged that people should learn Kabbalah. Of course, there were Kabbalists and there were Jews who learned Kabbalah, but the mainstream in Europe was more like anti-Kabbalah, like try to stay away, it's too holy, you might not be qualified for it. So that was the attitude in Europe. So the Baal Shem Tov came and said everybody should learn Kabbalah. Now, since Kabbalah can have a very bad effect on a person, because if a person doesn't understand what Kabbalah says, it could drive him crazy. So that's why the Baal Shem Tov started such thing as Chasidus, which Chasidus is that the person who is a Kabbalist explains to the typical person certain things of Kabbalah in a way that everybody could understand. So Chasidus is not really Kabbalah, it's taking parts of Kabbalah which a typical person can understand and explaining it in a way that a typical person could understand. And that's what the Baal Shem Tov kind of encouraged his students, the one who became rabbis, they should engage more in this factor of teaching Kabbalah in a way that people could understand, and that is Chasidus. So when you look at all Chasidus Svurim, they're all based in Kabbalah, and they're mostly explained in a way that everybody could understand. So that was the third thing that the Baal Shem Tov brought into the world. Now in Kabbalah, the Baal Shem Tov actually brought on a new thing in the world, which is called Elikus and Einoid Movadai, which that is the approach of how we look at God. Because before the Baal Shem Tov, the way people looked at God was more that there exists God, and God created the world, so the world is like a thing for itself. Now, the whole concept of Elikis is to see God in everything, that everything is God. There's only one being, which you have to learn Chasidus in order to understand this. I did give some speeches on this subject, and hopefully I will give more speeches on this subject. So that was another thing about the Shem Tov, of the concept of Elikus, of seeing Hashem in everything, which is part of Kabbalah. Now another way how to become subservient, to have bittul, is through the Vekas. Now the Vekas has a few parts to it. The Vekas means connection, that you become connected to the thing. Now the Baal Shem Tov teaches we should be connected to the mitzvahs, because the way we connect to Hashem is through the mitzvahs, and we should actually be connected to the mitzvahs. So first of all, the meaning of that is that a lot of people, they just do a mitzvah, like they just do it, I did it, a yoitze gewein, as we say in Yiddish, to be yoitze, and that's it. They don't really connect to it. So the Baal Shem Tov said, no, put yourself into the mitzvah. Make a whole thing out of the mitzvah. Become connected to the mitzvah. And part of being connected to the mitzvah is to make achona, to make preparation. Don't just do the mitzvah like, boom, I did the mitzvah and I'm finished. Make a whole preparation, because the more you prepare for the mitzvah, the more the mitzvah becomes a strong part of you and very lively by you. So to give an example, I heard there was a Gudel, a non-Chusid, that he was sitting and learning all day, and when it came Chanukah to light the candles, he was learning, he saw the clock shows that now it's time to light the candles. He picked up and went to the menorah, lit it, and went back to learn. Didn't spend any time by the candles, didn't sing anything. So for a Gadol that was sitting and learning all day, it might be a good thing that his connection was with Torah. So he was sitting and learning, so he connected to Hashem through connecting to the Torah, to actually sitting and learning. But what if a student came and saw that, and that student wasn't that strong of a learning person? So that student, he saw his Rebbe just, lighting the candle and going back to learning. So he thought, this is a mitzvah, just do it. So this is why the Baal Shem Tov came and said, no, let's make a whole thing out of lighting the candle. And that is with every mitzvah. It's not just lighting the candle of Hanukkah, it's every mitzvah. Make a preparation, sing, prepare yourself. Be tuned into the mitzvah. Make a whole chiyas out of the mitzvah. And that's how you connect to the mitzvah. And through that connection, you'll connect to Hashem. And then there's another thing of the Vekas, which is through Neginim and dancing, through singing and dancing, which singing warm songs can wake up a person. So there's a story which happened by the second Baal Veruv, Rebbe Tzion Baal Veruv. He was a composer. He made very nice songs and very warm songs. So one day he was traveling, and he passed by a field and he saw two non-religious Bukhram were singing there. So he went over to them and he said, oh, you like singing? How about let me teach you some of my songs? So he taught them his songs and he repeated it a few times. They should know it well. And then he went away. And the Bukhram sang it a few times, a few days later, and they kept on singing it until it woke them up. And they got a hir at Shiva, and they were looking for him, and they found him, and they ended up becoming Balchuvas. They went back on the derech, and all came from a Negen. That is the definition from the Vekas, that you could serve Hashem by singing and being tuned in, connected to the songs. And when you sing heartwarming songs, Jewish songs, that thing awakens you and it brings you closer to Hashem. And through the person is being duvik, connected to the mitzvah, the more connected a person is to a mitzvah, the less you think about yourself and the more you think about Hashem, so the more bittul you have, so the more closer you become to Hashem. Then another thing which the Baal Shem Tov taught was simcha, happiness. First of all, at that time in Europe, the way European Jewry was practiced at that time was the opposite of simcha, which is very hard to understand, but it's historical facts as far as we know, and there are multiple sources for that factors, that the mainstream Ashkenazi Jews believed that you have to be sorrow. Even though it says in the Torah, Ivdias Hashem b'simcha, and it says in the Torah that all the trouble will come because you're not happy. It says, but somehow they believe that since we're in Galus and we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, so that means we are not good people, so we're not allowed to be happy. So maybe some were happy while they were doing a mitzvah, but after they did the mitzvah, when they just went on their day, they were not happy. So the Baal Shem Tov came and refreshed this concept. No, you have to be happy, and you have to be happy all the time. And then there was another thing of segifim. Segifim means self-torture, inflicting pain in yourself. A lot of people used to go and toss themselves in the snow, and do all kinds of torture, fasting a lot of days. And Baal Shem Tov went against this, and he said, this is not the way to practice Judaism. It's the opposite. The more you engage in simcha, the more you defeat your Yetzer Hara. The way the Yetzer Hara works, what he does is, he makes a person feel sorrow. When a person feels sorrow, he doesn't have the real will and cheshik to serve Hashem. So what does the person do? He's trying to find entertainment. So the person goes and runs after temptations. Running after temptations makes you feel empty and nothing. Then you become more sorrow and more depressed until you completely fall down. That's how the Yetzer Hara works. So the Baal Shem Tov claimed, don't be busy with segifim. Don't be busy with sourness. Be busy with happiness, and that's how you will defeat the Yetzer Hara, and you'll have the upper hand, not the Yetzer Hara. And happiness is through dancing, to singing, to anything that could lift us up and be happy, and to be happy that we could serve Hashem. Then another teaching of the Baal Shem Tov was the concept that exists such thing as a chassid and not a talmid, not a student. Before the Baal Shem Tov, there existed always the concept of serving your Rebbe, which the Gemara talks about it, that a person could learn more from serving his Rebbe than from learning from his Rebbe. Why? Because when you serve your Rebbe, you're with him all the time, you see how he behaves, so that teaches you how to behave. So before the Baal Shem Tov came, there was such a thing as a person that wanted to grow, went and he served his Rebbe, he was around his Rebbe a lot. So that's how he learned how to behave properly. Now the Baal Shem Tov came and started the concept of Chasidim, which did not exist before that. That just go to a Rebbe and be around the Rebbe and talk to the Rebbe, have a connection to him, and don't necessarily serve him. Because when you go to a Rebbe and you just see how he davens and you see how he learns and you talk to him and you have a connection to him, so he will have the ability to direct you in the right direction. So that was a new concept of the Baal Shem Tov, is to be a chassid, to be close to Rebbe, even though you're not his Gabba, you're not serving him all the time. Then there was another thing which the Baal Shem Tov contributed, was not to be so obsessed of things you don't have to be obsessed, like Zman Tefillah. And Halacha says there's a certain time where you could daven. But then it says that if you didn't daven then, you could still daven till Chatzos, till midday. So the Baal Shem Tov said, don't be busy to be makbet, I have to daven before Zman Tefillah. If a person feels he could daven better if he davens later, then rather daven later and don't be makpid on this thing, because you don't have to be makpid. Now, as far as I understand, it's because there's a halacha that you have to daven up to a certain time. But the halacha states that if you didn't daven, you could still daven until midday. What does that mean? That the halacha doesn't say necessarily you have to do it. It's just better you should do it before this time. So as far as I understand what Shem said, since you don't have to be makbet on this, you could do it later, is the focus on the main thing. The main thing is for you to be connected to Hashem and connected to the mitzvah. So is rather you should do the mitzvah fully on a later time than to do it on an earlier time, when it's more of like a better way to do it on the earlier time. So might as well do it a little later, but do it fully when you do it later. And there's also such a thing as digdig, which digdig means the way you pronounce the Hebrew letters when you pray. So the such thing as digdig. And the Baal Shem Tov was against this, because he was like, you don't have to be medagdig and everything, just the main thing is to daven, not the main thing is the way you say it. So that was another teaching from the Baal Shem Tov. And then there's another thing which I'm not so familiar, which that is part of Shchita. It's a certain knife which the Baal Shem Tov claimed we should use. You have to talk to a shoichet. I don't know exactly all the details. Then another teaching from the Baal Shem Tov was that we should do all these things because all these things will bring us closer to Mashiach. It will bring closer the redemption. So that was kind of like the Baal Shem Tov kept on saying, we should do all these things and we should be busy to become better people, so the redemption should be closer. Now we all know there was such thing as Misnagdim. Misnagdim means those who opposed Chasidim. Now, what was their claim? Why did they oppose Chasidim? Is number one, they claimed, it says, Al tifresh min hatzivah. Al tifresh min hatzivah means don't separate from the main. Now, today's days, this Al tifresh min hatzivah is not even an argument, because today, most Ashkenazi Jews who are religious are descended from Chasidim or are Chasidim themselves. But back in the days, the Chassidim were a minority, and that's why they claimed, Al tifresh min hatzivah, why are you being different? Another thing they were against was the Vekas, the fact that Baal Shem Tov said you could serve Hashem with the Vekas, like sitting down and just singing and do all kinds of other things with the Vekas and not necessarily learn. And they were against it because they claimed, no, the way you become connected to Hashem is through learning. And then another thing, they were very pro the concept of segifim, to inflict pain on yourself. Then there was the argument of Shchita that the Misnagdim claimed that the Chassidim are using a non-kosher knife because we have Masorah to use this knife and using a different knife. So therefore they were against the Chassidim for those kind of reasons. Now what I try to explain here is the overall picture of Chasidus. And in order to understand more fully Chasidus, you have to learn Chasidus Yisvurim. And the main Chasidus I have to learn is the Tanya. Now, a lot of people think, oh, if I learn Tanya, I'll become Lubavitch. The answer is no. There are tens of thousands of Jews who learn Tanya who have no connection to Lubavitch whatsoever. Happens to be the Baal Tanya was the first Lubavitch Rebbe, but you could learn Tanya and have nothing to do with Lubavitch. The Tanya is literally a Kabbalah cipher explained in a way that everybody could understand. And it explains to you what are you doing on the world and how you could connect to Hashem. So it's an amazing thing for everybody to learn Tanya and to learn other Chasidus Yisvurim, to get a hang of what Chasidus was all about, and to understand the Baal Shem Tov, what they contribute to the world, and all this stuff will help everybody to grow in Judaism and become closer to Hashem. I hope you all understand. Have a wonderful day.